Good afternoon. What's going on, everyone? It's your girl, Miss Analytical, and coming to you straight out of NYC on this quiet but kind of cloudy Saturday afternoon / evening, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, I was going to do this commentary about this article I've read from the New York Post, but it's going to be two parts because one is going to be about a trans doctor. The second one is going to be about a famous transgender teenager. Okay. So the first one's going to be about the transgender doctor. And according to the New York Post, it reads, trans doctor who helps teens transition says it's now gone too far. A transgender psychologist who has helped hundreds of teens transition has warned that it has gone too far and fears many are making a life-changing decision because it's trendy and pushed on social media. Erica Anderson, 71, who is transgender herself, told the Los Angeles Times that she is horrified that even 13-year-old kids are now getting hormone treatment without even meeting with psychologists. I think it's gone too far, said Anderson, who until recently led the U.S. Professional Society at the forefront on transgender care. For a while, we were all happy that society was becoming more accepting and more families than ever were embracing children that were gender variant. Now it's got to the point where there are kids presenting at clinics whose parents say, this just doesn't make sense. She said, Anderson is so concerned. In fact, she said she is considering ending her own pioneering work, helping teens transition. I have these private thoughts. This has gone too far. It's going to get worse. I don't want any part of it, she said. I worry that people will accuse me of setting the train in motion as part of those who advocated the affirmative approach to gender in youth, even though that's not a reasonable account of what happened. She believes that the dramatic rise in teen seeker treatment is likely driven by peer pressure as much as wide acceptance of trans issues. A fair number of kids are getting into it because it's trendy, she previously told the Washington Post. I think in our haste to be supportive, we're missing an element. In her latest interview, she told the LA Times to flatly say there couldn't be any social influence in the formation of gender identity files and identity flies in the face of reality. Teenagers influence each other. That appears to have been exacerbated by the pandemic, with children becoming more isolated, and also leaning more on networks on social media. What happens when the perfect storm of social isolation, exponentially increased consumption of social media, the popularity of alternative identities affects the actual development of individual kids? Anderson asked the LA paper. We're sailing in uncharted seas, she warned. Anderson readily shared her birth name, Eric, and her story of how an endocrinologist refused to prescribe hormones and left her feeling empty and deeply ashamed when she first sought them at age 45. She finally got them at 58 and had genital surgery at 61, thrilled to finally become a woman. But while thrilled that the world is now more accepting, she fears it has swung to an extreme, noting a 13-year-old patient whose pediatrician put him on testosterone, even though he had not met with a psychologist. Why is this kid on testosterone so precipitously? Anderson asked. Anderson, a member of the American Psychological Association committee that is writing guidelines for transgender health care, believes some children seek treatment in the hope that it helps with wider psychological problems, leaving them desperate, depressed when it doesn't. She insists that those allowing medical treatment for kids without rigorous psychological evaluation risk committing malpractice. Those who are confused about their gender identity also need to wait until they are absolutely sure before acting, she said. I have a dictum. When in doubt, doubt, she told the LA paper. Questioning is a good thing. How are you going to find out if you are lockstep with whatever conclusion you come to first? Despite her pioneering work, Anderson finds herself at odds with the trend to make it easier for anyone to transition. Dr. A.J. Eckert, medical director of the Gender and Life Affirming Medicine program at the Anchor Health Initiative in Stamford, Connecticut, eschewed the need for therapy. Being trans or gender diverse is not a mental illness, and compulsory psychotherapy is not the standard of care in the gender affirming medical model. Eckert, who is non-binary and uses they them pronouns, told the paper, forcing transgender and gender diverse youth through extensive assessments while their cis peers are affirmed in their identity without questioning conveys to them that they are not normal. As for Anderson's claim that kids are trans just because it's trendy, Eckert adds, is it trendy to be one of the most marginalized and vulnerable groups? And that's how the article ends. But I'm going to take it from here. I find Dr. Erica Anderson, who is a doctor of psychology, to be a person like the Dr. Frankenstein. You know, if you ever read the book Frankenstein, I read it in high school. It's like, you know, when somebody does an experiment and they think it's like a really great thing, but then somehow or another, the experiment either works out, but then it goes too far, or it doesn't work out and the person who's experimented has to deal with the damage and effects of the experiment. Now, I'm not linking Frankenstein, the movie, the book, to people who are transgender. I want to make that clear, because 2 years ago, I ain't going through what happened back then where people was putting words in my mouth. Just like I shut people down then, I will shut people down now. It ain't going to go down like that. Making that clear. But what I'm saying is that Erica Anderson thought what she was doing was noble, in that helping children embrace their chosen gender identity, or what gender they felt was their true gender, as opposed to the gender that they were born under. And she really thought that she was doing something really noble and great, helping children. But she's realized through her experience as a psychologist, she's finding that a lot of these youth are, one, going after the norms on social media, particularly on places such as TikTok, where they push this, and Instagram, where they don't push as much, but they still pushing it. This whole trend, and I don't want to say it as it's like, a fashion trend, but this goes back, and we gotta call it what it is, to number 44. When 44 was in office, this was when the big push for children who were trans was being pushed out in the forefront. And I remember this in 2009 on the Tyra Banks show, where there were teens who was transgender, and their parents didn't want to deal with them because of it. They had girlfriends, they had boyfriends, but they were of the opposite. They identified as the gender they were assigned to. So the transgender youth had significant others who identified with their sex, with their gender that they were born under. So one of them basically said, I could basically produce sperm. Now, this was a transgender male who was black. and his girlfriend was Mexican, and the mother couldn't stand it. The mother couldn't stand it at all. But the Mexican girl really already had children. It was a weird kind of story anyway. But it was bizarre. But to get to the point, what I'm saying is that you had a lot of people complaining about this because they were like, if you basically push this transgenderism on children, you are going to end up with a colossal effect of children wanting to transgender because they just feel that they're in the wrong body. Okay? And it's also going to mess up the gender norms because you're not just going to have children who want to identify or want to get their gender reassigned, but you're going to have all these other genders coming out. And guess what happened? Did that actually come true? Yes, it did. Starting in 2013, when Miley Cyrus came out as pansexual, and then from there, she talked about how she didn't identify as a gender. She basically was non-binary. Next thing you know, because a Disney child basically said that she was pansexual and non-binary, the next thing you know, everybody else child who was, feeling different about themselves, they was like, well, maybe I'm not a trans person. Maybe I'm just non-binary. Maybe I'm, pangender. Then you had the queer movement come out. And it's a connection between that and Black Lives Matter. Because many of those who were marching and members of Black Lives Matter, they just weren't transgender. Many people talk about the transgender aspect. No. That's when you start seeing Black youth stating that they're non-binary queer. They're not saying, I'm a lesbian, I'm gay. It's like I'm pangender, non-binary, queer, trans affirming femme. I mean, I've read stuff like this. And now we're in 2022 and we're seeing that it's becoming more of a norm than like a deviancy. But back in 2009, Obama's first term, we were just hearing the word transgender. When we were growing up, all of us in the 80s, we knew of the term transsexual, okay? And in the term transsexual, it was when you got the surgery to become the gender that you identified with. Now, here's the kick. Do you know how long it would take a person to go through mental, psychological therapy before they were given the approval to have sexual reassignment? It would take an average of 7 years, sometimes a decade. My mother's coworker was one of the first transsexual women to work for the city of New York. When they were hired, they were identified as a male. But many people assume like, oh, they were just gay. But then they had the surgery and they became Minerva. Nice person. I knew Minerva. Minerva was so nice. And Minerva would offer me candies and cookies and things like that. I was like 7, 8, 9 years old. But then what occurred was when I was 10 years old in the winter of 94, Minerva passed away. And Minerva passed away from illness. It wasn't AIDS nor HIV. What happened with Minerva is that Minerva had gotten sick through years of hormone therapies. Back in the day, transgenders would take these horse pills. And they were very thick. And it was like in the beginning stages of becoming a woman. Or even becoming a man. But most of them took it to become a woman. And they were so big. And they were horse pills. And many of them ended up succumbing because of those pills. Everybody cried. And, people moved on and things like that. But no one ever said that what Minerva did was evil. Nobody ever basically condemned Minerva. It was just that people knew Minerva was different. But there was also something that people noticed. Transsexuality was a rarity. So it's not like it didn't exist, but it was more of, it's not common to really be trans identified. Most people identify as straight. Most people are straight. You have people who are gay identified, lesbian identified, but there's even a smaller number of people who identify as trans. You're seeing more youth identify as trans than you're seeing adults. That in itself is not normal. And that's a problem. And another problem in this is, how come back in the days, let's go back to 30 years ago, when you saw children and adults identify as trans, they dressed the part and looked the part. Okay? How come trans children and even trans adults today, they ain't really looking the part? Like, they'll switch up. It's like, okay, I identify as a trans female, but I'm looking like a boy. Or I'm looking like a man, but I identify as trans. Or they'll have the surgery, but they won't go through with the entire surgery. Like when somebody was a transsexual, they had the whole surgery. Now, I'm not judging, because I understand why people don't go through the whole procedure. I get it. But what I'm saying when it comes to how they present themselves, a lot of these people who present themselves as trans, they're not looking trans. They're looking like the gender that they were born with. And this leads me to believe that Dr. Erica Anderson, who herself is a transgender woman, is telling the truth. It's like, listen here, this is more of a fad. This is more of a trend. Case in point, 2 years ago, when I was attacked by a whole bunch of I wasn't even attacked by transgender people. Because I mentioned that Megan Thee Stallion was accused of being trans, and I said the T word, okay? I said the T word, and it wasn't transgender. I had a person come from TikTok, the very social media site that promotes this, that Erica Anderson is mentioning, play a snippet of my video, of my upload, because she wanted to be messy and get at people who she claimed was targeting transgender people. She passed it off she played it for one of her TikTok followers who identified as a trans male. The trans male basically got upset, but never came at me. And that person was trans. She got her army of people to attack me, not only wanted me to take the video down, but wanted me to leave YouTube, and they even threatened my life, okay? They even threatened my life. They wanted me to end my own life, and then they was even sending verbal threats that they wanted to do physical harm. I had to contact law enforcement, okay? That's how deep this shit is. And I went on live that Thursday after I filed my complaint with law enforcement, and it wasn't cops. The girl came to me and got scared because she said law enforcement basically came to her house and she wanted me to stop it. And I said the exact words, bitch, you gotta live in the fucking shit you did. Because you proudly boasted that you sent social justice warriors to my page so that I could delete not just the video, but delete my channel, because I didn't want to apologize for what I said in the Megan Thee Stallion comment. Mind you, Megan nor her people never stepped to me. But there is a group of people that are pushing this agenda. And you have a lot of young people that's pushing it because they think it's cool. They looking at this as acceptance, and they're looking at this as basically social justice warrior work. And that if you don't accept them, you gotta go. And it's very scary in the sense, and it's very gang-like. You understand? It's like the reverse of like the 90s with the gang culture, where if you didn't join the gang, your life was in danger. But now this is like, if you don't follow the trend of supporting transgenderism and saying like, oh, people, have a right to be trans, or I support trans youth, or this and that, they will gang up on you, or attempt to gang up on you like they did me, and expect you to basically come over on their side. And you have a lot of people that get bullied into supporting them. But all this leads to number 44. And this is what the dark side of that administration did. They basically pushed this type of mentality. Now you have children who go to school who, if they don't support it, they're bullied. They're literally bullied. Like in colleges now, you have like gender inclusion, like the Women's Studies Center. There's no more Women's Studies Centers. You now have Gender Studies Centers to include basically trans youth, non-binary people, gender queer people. When this thing under Title 4, federal government allocated monies for women to have their own center. We don't have our own centers anymore. Now it's all about gender. You can thank number 44 for that. And this is why many people basically are critical of him. Then you also have J.K. Rowling, who the same generation of people who are attacking her, they were the same kids that read her book and made her a billionaire, multi-billionaire. But because she basically doesn't agree with the transgender movement, they want to lynch her. This woman has received death threats of, if I ever see you, it's going to go down. Because she don't agree with a commercial with women wearing tampons. I mean, trans women wearing tampons, or trans men saying that they bleed. And the worst thing about this is that you give power to people you give like paleo conservatives. You giving them like the ammunition to really go and attack. This is why you have a lot of pushback of the Disney Don't Say Gay, or like the whole Don't Say Gay law from DeSantis, because they want to teach this type of stuff in school and the parents aren't feeling it. So now you have a culture in this country that's fighting back, hence the culture wars that's going on. And if people would have just put their foot down in the beginning and was saying, listen, if this is how you identify as a personal thing, but you just can't rush and have surgery and perform surgery on these children. It takes years, if not a decade, to even get it approved to where, okay, you're identified as a transgender person. And then if you want to get the surgery, then we have to, basically, go through the process. Now, there are going to be people that's going to comment and say that's not true. But a lot of these people are going to be young people born in the mid-90s, early 2000s that are going to come and say it's not true. I know people who basically went through the transitioning process. Many of them are older than me. They told this to me. They told this to my mother. I know people who were going to go through the transitioning process and then they decided not to do it. But it was years of therapy by people who specialize in this. But there are doctors who do it, who do the procedure without actually taking the time to really make sure that they've gotten to see a psychologist because of money. It's quick money. Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid, and a lot of health insurance companies are now paying for this. So that's guaranteed money. A lot of these people are making millions from this. But then you got to talk to the parents, because a lot of the parents, particularly a lot of mothers, they do this because they may not have a daughter, but they always wanted a daughter. So they have 3 children, all sons, and one of the sons identifies as a girl. Or it could be the other way around. All daughters, but no sons. One of the sons, the daughter identifies as a boy. And then you got these weirdo parents that they're taking their 5-year-old children who say, you know, I'm a girl, I want to wear dresses, or I'm a boy, I want to play with bikes or cars and trucks. When in my generation, you had kids like that, but many of them grew out of it, but there was few that didn't. It is what it is. But to rush and get this surgery while you're still developing, knowing that you don't really stop developing really until you're 25 years old. Puberty does not end really until you're 25. I learned this in psychology class. Also, I'm going to end it off with this. I remember studying a case in psychology class about a person who tried to basically, they wanted to transgender because when they were born, the doctor actually cut their thing off. So they was living their life as a girl. And then they found out that they was a boy and they thought they was going to be happy. So they basically got hormones to become a male. They tried to live a normal life, but they could never live it. And then they basically off themselves. Now that's sad. But the thing is that that's not transgenderism. That's basically a messed up thing that happened. But the boy was forced to live as a girl to basically make sure that the mistake was never known. You still have certain cases like that going on. And you have a lot of these doctors that are weird. And I think a lot of these doctors, they need to be brought up on charges. I think the children are innocent. I think the children that identify like this, they're not just following a trend. They also aren't getting the therapy that they should be getting properly. And I'm not a doctor. I didn't say this. I just read the article. If you want to go at somebody, you could go after Erica Anderson. I'm not saying you could, but I bet you're not going to do that because she's a person of authority. So you're not going to come at her like y'all came at me and other people on this page. Y'all even came at Lovely T. But in closing, I think we have to basically reevaluate this in order to save society because it's getting out of hand. Because I don't believe there's a such thing as a pangender person. I'm going to be honest with you. I believe you're just one gender and that's all. You may not want to identify with it. That's one thing. To be multi-genders, I don't believe that at all. And I believe most people don't. But because of the climate we're in, where people get chastised for saying and speaking their minds, that's not on code with what's trendy, you're getting backlash. People don't want the backlash. And with that being said, it's your girl, Miss Analytical. I'm signing off. Thank you for reading this, listening to this commentary. Thank you for also reading the article. Stay tuned, and I'll be back shortly.